This is a in-depth look at Swamp Thing 88 or Swamp Thing 89 number 1. This is the issue that was banned by DC back in 1989 that led to Rick Veitch leaving Swamp Thing immediately. It's been finally republished after almost 40 years. And I read this recently and I just had a lot of thoughts on it about how just good this is. Just to kind of as a preface, I never read any of Rick Veitch's Swamp Thing run. It wasn't anything against Rick Veitch because I knew his work was good. It was just when the Alan Moore run ended, I figured, okay, it's a good time to leave because nobody's going to be able to top Alan Moore. So there's just a lot of things in this book that I'm unfamiliar, so I'm reading this as a new reader. DC did a really nice job here, kind of summarizing the events that happen just from a 35,000 foot level. But essentially, similar to what Alan Moore did with Swamp Thing later in the run, where he has Swamp Thing go through space, Rick Veitch had Swamp Thing go through a temporal journey. And he's going through time, seeing different universes, and meeting different people of mystical powers. And here he ends up in the time close to the end of Jesus Christ's life, and it starts off with the Last Supper. And this book reminds me a lot of the movie The Last Temptation of Jesus Christ, in that they took the events that are in the Bible, but they changed them, so they're not strictly following the Bible. But the same message is brought across, similar to that movie. That movie dealt with the frailty of Jesus Christ as a human being. This deals more with the events of the Bible being reinterpreted slightly, but the message still comes across. The main events still come across. So it starts off, as I said, with the Last Supper. And then you switch to these three magicians that are calling Belial, who is, in Christian religion, he was the last of the demons or to fall into the pit, and he was considered the most vile of all those demons. And these three magicians come and they actually offer their eyeballs as a sacrifice, because apparently if you look upon him, you could like go mad. And these three men are saying, listen, Jesus Christ is here. He's doing good works. He's going to take men away from the path of, of savagery and war, and he's bringing love and peace. We can't have that. And so when Belial asks them, how do you know this? The three men admit that they pose as wise men. So these are the three wise men, but they didn't come bearing gifts out of kindness. They came there as ops to see them. And one of them says, if we would have known how powerful we would become, we would have killed them right there. These guys are really agents of evil, or Lucifer, and they want to keep man in this path of aggression and war and anger. So they're asking Belial for help, and they're saying, why don't you kill him? He goes, no, my way is to corrupt and defile, and we desecrate. So it's sort of like, if you read scripture, and I'm not overly religious, but if you've ever read anything, the devil doesn't do anything overt. Everything is nudging people the wrong way. So then you go to the next scene where this is Mary Magdalene. She is still a prostitute, or she is a prostitute, and she's with this Roman soldier Marcus, who is the captain of the guard, and he, even though they have this kind of relationship, he really does care for her, really likes her. And as he leaves, she says, listen, I have a favor. Jesus of Nazareth, the carpenter, or they refer him as the carpenter, he's getting Pontius Pilate upset, and I'm scared they're going to arrest him. And he's like, well, I'm the captain of the guard, so I'm going to be the one that has to arrest him. So I like his works. I like what he's doing. So I'm going to arrest him and just let him slip away. And that way we'll just say, hey, we lost him. We don't know. Because he likes what Jesus Christ is doing. So as he leaves her, um, Belial comes and basically possesses Marcus. Then you have Swamp Thing in space still, and he talks about these major events with the Druid priests, the devotees of Krishna, just all these things. He's kind of going through here, tying all this in, and then he lands in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he just is a fruit, and he's observing these events where Jesus is sitting there in the Garden of Gethsemane meditating. And he realizes that he knows that Swamp Thing is there, but he's like not scared. Swamp Thing can sense he's not scared. He's meditating. Then when they actually give the arrest order, they're like, "Hey, where's Marcus?" Oh, here he is. But you see here he's yellow and his eyes are green. Eyes are red. And they're like, "What's the matter with him?" Because he's possessed, and he's possessed by that demon. And while Jesus here is meditating in the Garden of Gethsemane, Swamp Thing is like, "I know what's gonna happen to him soon." So Swamp Thing creates some fruits and pours some nectar into his cup. He's like saying, maybe sweet nectar to soothe his contemplations. So while he's sitting there praying, meditating, eventually you can see here that she's asking, what about what I asked you for? And he's like, "Yeah, forget that." And he hits her, walks off. And then as Marcus, who's the possessed Marcus, comes to basically kill Jesus, Swamp Thing's like, "Hey, look, I just can't sit idly by." And he's like fighting Marcus and basically saying, "You're not going to sit there and ruin this good man," while Jesus is drinking from what's known going to be eventually the Holy Grail. And at that moment, Swamp Thing is sent back on his temporal journey before he can do anything else. And Jesus finds this ear that's fallen off, changes it, and heals the demon. And because he's done that, the demon is bound. This demon that's in him is bound to the earth. And what you realize is that that demon is Etrigan, his son. And this is sort of like the origin or explanation of how Etrigan began bound to the earth. And earlier in the book, and sorry I missed this part, Jesus is described as a great magician, an alchemist. And a magician, sort of like, he can actually heal the sick. He can do all these things, and he's doing it for love. So this is why these guys want to like destroy him. And it's kind of interesting because it's not just because he's the son of God, but he can do these things, but because he's learned these great powers to do these things. So going back to that, he is arrested. He goes through that last several days of his life, crown of thorns, and he's crucified, and he's hung up on the cross. So again, like the last temptation of Jesus Christ, the book follows the main events. It's just some of the points of how you get there are different, but at the end it still happens. And Mary Magdalene and Marcus are looking, and he's saying, "I'm really sorry, this is my fault." And she's like, "Well, you were possessed." But he's like, "No, but I was weak, and I shouldn't have been weak." And he's like, "I guess that," he goes, "we're not going to see this until the end of Caesar." And his life is going to be ascribed to that goal. And he really feels bad because he realized he was really the man of God. And as the blood drips, this one follower collects it, and there's this amber, and they keep talking about how this amber is like to use a Marvel analogy, it's like almost like an infinity gem, and somehow has power over Swamp Thing. And they still haven't really described yet everything it does, but it somehow collects mystical energies. And at the end, what you find out is that the reason why he went back on his temporal journey was that Jesus sent him on it. That when he drank the nectar, he basically consumed Swamp Thing, and he became part of his design. So, it was like Jesus still knew that he had to like die on the cross, and he thought that Swamp Thing would do enough to like disrupt that. So basically, that's why he's there. And it's a really lovely story in that um, it follows all the events. It's with its own interpretation, but there's just so much going on here, and just such a well done comic. And like I said, I've never read any of this run, so I don't really need it. I didn't really need to. The way the story's told, the intro here, and then in the letter page, instead of reprinting the letters, you have this long introduction or explanation or piece written by Stephen Bissette. Now, Stephen Bissette is the perfect guy to write this, because him and Rick Veitch both collaborated and worked on the art with Alan Moore on Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run. Steve Bissette, Rick Veitch collaborated very early on in the very late 70s, early 80s in comics such as Epic Illustrated. And he gives a real insightful explanation of the events, the times that you're in with the 80s. Everything here is spot on. But you had to have been an adult in the 80s to really get this really complete explanation narrative of the changing faces of America with Reaganism and then George Bush, and how everything started leaning right wing. DC was bought by Time Warner, so now they were no longer a comics company. They were owned by a corporate behemoth. And it talked about how, Rick actually decided to offer to go back, but he didn't hear anything, so that's why he left the book. And Neil Gaiman and Jamie Delano were talking about how to follow up next. But when they saw what happened to Rick Veitch, Jamie Delano and Neil Gaiman both said, yeah, we're both out of here. We're not going to do it either. And talked about how times change and how you can publish it now. And this is just a really excellent recap. I read this, and it's like, yeah, you had to be informed and living as an adult in that time to really write this. And then this is the original sketch that Rick Veitch submitted as an idea for the cover, and this is kind of like what started everything when they saw this. Even though DC greenlit the book, then at the 11th hour they pulled the book. And just so you know, there's all the ads are in the back, and these are like the original DC ads from 1989. Batman, logo from the movies. This is just a really wonderful book, and I hope that I did some service in describing this book, but it's just really well done. And I sort of regret not reading this run, but then again, I wouldn't have had the last issues, and Rick Veitch would have left abruptly, and therefore I would have been disappointed. So, but I will say this is an excellent comic. If you liked Swamp Thing, you never read this, you should read this. If you have not read superhero comics in a long time, this is actually very good. I'm looking forward to reading the remaining 4 issues of this mini-series. I think it'll be excellent. Really impressed with how far ahead of its time this was. I'm not going to say it's on the same level as Alan Moore, but it's pretty damn close. And pretty damn close to Alan Moore is really good. This is just an excellent comic. So anyway, sorry for all the spoilers, but I just kind of wanted to talk about it just because I really like this so much. Thanks.